there's a particular way in which African culture reflects on those who have departed. The idea that certainly at a time of mourning, we need to take time, we need to take stock, and maybe focus on the positive things about Mama Madikizela Mandela.
Oh yes, I mean in African culture, when somebody dies, however bad they may be, I'm not suggesting that she was, you think of the positive things, let the spirit of the ancestors guide this person to where they are. Only later can they begin to raise words.
But of course, what makes it particularly challenging in her case is that so much of even the supposedly bad things are now being understood very differently from the negative and quite deliberate attempts to discredit her for so long.
I think it's very important that when you look at somebody like Winnie Mandela, to look at the concrete conditions of what was happening at the time. All of these things that are coming after here, we hear, people who were responsible for Stompie accepting that, she was not. It was the time of the Askaris, where the disinformation was, leased out, to mislead, the people. And she was actually in there unbroken. She was the only, person that you could find, as many people have told you, in every weeping home, across party political things, that the people themselves say she's a mother of the nation, is a very telling story.
But of course also, I mean, there was this side of her that was quite angry, that was quite angered by what she had seen, because whilst other people may have been in exile or imprisoned, she was at the coalface of the brutality that was being experienced, particularly by young people. As a mother, that surely would have stirred her.
Now, yeah, that is exactly where the people really miss the point. What we are bringing out, the woman, she had to be angry. She had to be. She usually says, "I was the most married person, that you have, a mother of children." Married, the husband is in jail for life. People are dying, tear gas, she's detained, she's all of these things. She had to be, angry.
And if we go back to the 80s, and I want to bring you in, Hotstix, there was this idea that she'd been unleashed in a way to be part of campaigns, quite deliberate campaigns, to render the country ungovernable. I mean, that's the history we quite often forget around what was happening in the 1980s, that, as she later said, the country was at war.
Well, I wish I could understand, the reference to deliberate. I mean, as Prof had said, she was in the forefront of everything that was happening at that time. So she, obviously, given her background and the environment in which she found herself in, she felt that she could not stand back and allow others to dictate how it was going to go forward. She understood very well what her role would be within there. It was not a deliberate, presentation to the people that, okay, you go in there and do things. If we who had been there felt that we're being aggrieved by our current circumstances then, we only reacted based on what we were experienced at that particular time.
But of course, she was a complete human being. I mean, she wasn't only an angry person, she wasn't only a radical person, she was a complete human being with a softer side, a tender side. When she sat down with a musician like you, what did you listen to? What jazz records, as I imagine there would have been at the time, did you listen to?
Well, most of the music that, to be honest, that she would be listening to, she loved Brenda Fassie, I must say. She loved most of the female singers. She loved Mama Miriam. I guess for me, it was, she would love things I did because of the kind of relationship that I have with the kids and the family. I grew up with those kids, I grew up in that environment. And for me, to her, I was not the musician. I was a son within the family, within the home, and I guess that's probably the reason that my music would have meant so much to her as well.
Because your success, in a way, was the success of another member of the family, of an adopted son.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Prof, what inspired the poem that you read a little earlier?
No, it's because, Winnie loved poetry. There's one other thing that people do not know about her. While she was actually being harassed, she was able to cross into a place like Swaziland. That's where I first, saw her. Of course, to go and see her children and also to encourage, people, few people, and then, disappear. I remember once, there's a guy called Pitika Ntuli, a poet who died. He wrote this poem that Winnie really liked. It goes like this. Generally speaking, in Africa, we cannot salute General de Gaulle. He packed and left Francophone Africa. Churchill, we watched his bowing out parade. As for Eisenhower, we neglected him. Spinola of Portugal lost his generalship down in the African bush. As for the founders of their racist barracks, General Botha, General Smart, General Herzog, it is time for us to take cover. For generally speaking, the best of the generals is a general uprising. That was 3 months before, Soweto. And she was, I remember when she turned to work, when she said, a general uprising, a general uprising.
So she almost had a sense of foreboding, or certainly that things were about to go differently in Soweto in 1976.
Yeah, that things were going to happen, very, differently.
Someone said today at the memorial, and for a moment as I was listening, I just picked up on this particular line where Mama Winnie acted as though the ANC was unbanned. I thought that was fantastic because, yes, indeed, the ANC was banned, the PAC was banned, all political parties were banned. But for her, she would act as she felt it is the right thing to do. She was unbanned.
But also there's this tendency that when someone passes away, we use flowery language that maybe in some cases could be exaggerated, but you almost can't find the words to adequately describe certainly her courage. I mean, when you look now at the footage of her confronting the apartheid security police, demanding that people be taken out of vans and asking the tough questions, those were images that even now, in 2018, are breathtaking for what they represent. I can't imagine what they must have done to people at that time.
She was a very, 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 phenomenal, person. Even when she was now the deputy minister of, arts, which was a banishment, because in South Africa, if they do not like you, they put you up, with the arts. Sipho has mentioned something very important. We did not get liberated merely by armed struggle. It was the cultural and economic boycott that was being pushed by musicians, the painters, the sculptors, the poets. Those were the people who were echoing her story, even abroad, even in exile.
Profiling it.
Yeah, profiling it.
I mean, quite rightly. I mean, so many of the concerts of the time that were focused on remembering and releasing, of course, Nelson Mandela, either concerts at Wembley Stadium, artists would come down to Swaziland, keeping the Mandela name alive. She was a very big part of that, wasn't she?
Absolutely. When I remember, when I was in London during the Wembley concerts, some of the kids around there didn't even know who Nelson Mandela was. But they understood, they knew those musicians, you see. And when those musicians took to the platform to speak about Nelson, some of the young Afrikaner musicians that I met in Cape Town, they called themselves the full Vryheid musicians, had a concert called Not in Our Name. And one of those sons was Piet Koorn's sons. He said, Not in Our Name. And so you can imagine what Prof is saying about the role that musicians played in terms of how they profiled political leaders, but also highlighting the scourge of apartheid through the arts. But one of the things that I want to come back to with regards to Mama's courage, I think it would be very important someday that many of the young MK soldiers, many of the MK guys who worked with her, come here and tell their stories about how she saved them in the most difficult situations.
I suspect not only MK soldiers, but many others
soldiers,
involved in many different ways. And I suppose that's the theme where we might end our discussion, the fact that in life and in death, everyone could proclaim her. I mean, today one of the things that was quite clear was that she was possibly the only senior ANC politician who could say Viva EFF and not be censured for it. So as we wrap up then this conversation, it's a few days yet before, of course, she's finally laid to final resting place. Your closing remarks, your closing thoughts, and what is it that you want South Africa to think about in these coming days?
For me, what saddens me more than anything is because I'm a sculptor. Miriam Makeba, died after doing such brilliant work. So many people have died. Do you see any monuments? We are going to be lamenting on Paul Kruger's monument. We are going to lament on Cecil John Rhodes' monument. I just came back, from Italy. Works of art that were done 1,000 years ago are earning money, for tourism. We do not have a way of honoring our own people. Already people have been saying to me, come to my studio to say, do a monument of the mother of the nation.
Prof, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. I hope we'll get one or two more songs, particularly one dedicated to Mama Madikizela Mandela in the coming months or years from you, Bra Hotstix.
There'll always be songs.
Thank you for staying us as we remembered the life and times of Mama Madikizela Mandela. Of course, we're going to continue to provide coverage, particularly on Saturday as she is laid to her final resting place.